What up, though? NPR. A black mother reflects on giving her three sons the talk again and again. June 28th, 2020, by Sam Sanders, Kenya Young. While the police killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, in addition to thousands of protests, have sparked new conversations across the country, one thing that's remained for many families is the talk. This is the talk that black parents give their children, particularly their sons, about how they should deal with the police if they encounter them. It is a hard talk, a sad talk. Sam Sanders, host of It's Been a Minute from NPR, sits down with Kenya Young, the executive producer of NPR's Morning Edition, to discuss how she talks with her three sons and what we can all learn from these types of dialogues. I have a 16-and-a-half-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 4-year-old. For some people, this may be the first time they've had to have the conversation. It is not the first time for us. We've had to have what's known in black culture as the talk many times. I'll never forget, there was a time the kids wanted to go to the park. This was right around the time of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling. My third son was just born, and I had many moments where I was holding him or nursing him and crying as I did so, because while I loved this little bundle of joy immensely, also just the amount of fear and worry for who I just brought into the world again, another black son. I remember the kids asking to go to the park and the laundry list of what I had to tell them. Don't wear your hood. Don't put your hands in your pocket. If you get stopped, don't run. Put your hands up. Don't make a lot of moves. Tell them your mother works for NPR. It just went on and on. There are stages of the talk as they start to get older. One is you just don't want them to draw attention to themselves. There's the stage of what you do if you do get caught. There's the stage of what you do if you do get caught. Get caught for what? I wonder what she's talking about, or what she sees or thinks her sons are going to be doing, where they will be caught for doing it. And also, how many of you instill fear in your children just because? Just because of something that happened to someone else and others who you don't know personally. Or maybe you do know personally, but they didn't happen to you. We all watched Ava DuVernay's When They See Us. The series is about the Central Park Five, and we jump into the movies, the highest form of propaganda. It changed to a new iteration of the talk, and that talk was, what do you do once you're inside those walls? So now, this woman is trying to figure out how to coach her sons on what they should do once they inevitably do something to where they are caught by the police and then they are put inside those walls. Don't ever sign a confession. Don't ever let them tell you that your mom told you it's okay. With the Ahmaud Arbery shooting, there was a sorrow, honestly, because we're in the middle of a pandemic, and yet we're still killing unarmed black men in the streets. She says we're still killing unarmed black men in the streets. She threw herself in that mix. I'm not sure why. That hit me like a ton of bricks. It hurt my heart that that was the truth of where racism is in this country. No, that was the truth of that situation. That was some men who had an altercation with another man. When we start charging theoretical groups of people with the actions of a couple or a few or one, then you don't get to the root of that problem. And you don't hold those accountable who were involved. Let's shake it. And so that conversation with them, there were a lot of tears. It was a lot of helplessness. This is what this woman is telling her children. This woman is crying. There's tears. And she's instilling fear in her children about things that have not happened. How do you think this affects a child? I don't know what to do anymore, you guys. I don't know how to save you. I don't know how to keep you safe. I don't know. Wow. My husband and I have been sure to provide a very good life for them. She has a husband. I wonder what her husband is doing while she's holding her young child and while she's instilling fear in her teenage children and crying. What is her husband doing? Where is he? We lived in places where we felt safe as a family, where they were in the best school districts. I did everything to make sure that we weren't in crime-ridden areas, that we were in safe neighborhoods, and that they did get the best. And still, I fear for them walking down the street. I think this woman has a fear issue. She needs counseling. I feel the same way. For me, as a black man who's covered these stories for a long time and also gotten the talk from my mother growing up. Me personally, I've never gotten the talk. The only talk I got from my mother is when I was at the age where I rarely came in the house. She always told me, if you do something to where you get put in a box, don't call me. All of my kids, I make them watch the news and I make them listen to NPR just to understand what's really going on. And so we can talk about that. Wow. The indoctrination is also coming from the mother. She makes them watch the news. Unbelievable. It may not sit well with some people when I say this, but I have to. I'm not sure if this woman loves her children. How many of you make your children watch the news? I do still think that they live in a space that, okay, I know this happened, but it's over there. But they also say, oh, that's not fair. This country is still killing black men. This country, this soil, very confusing. You see it all the time. Black moms say it. What if my son's name was ever a hashtag? What if we're posting his picture in a remembrance over senseless racism? It's just not fair that that's a constant thought every day as a mother of these three beautiful brown boys. Well, no one's forcing you to think these things. This woman has to learn to be in control of her mind. I'm not sure she's even fit to have children, to be honest. The Guardian. They are taught to fear us. Guardian U.S. readers on explaining the police to their black children, from educating them about Emmett Till to telling them never to leave home without an ID card. Parents of black children in the U.S. share how they prepare them for encounters with the police and the daily impact on their young lives. Parents of black children in the U.S. share how they prepare them for encounters with the police. Why would they be preparing them for an encounter with the police? Is an encounter with the police inevitable? My husband is one of just a handful of black police officers in our city. Our daughter saw some of the George Floyd coverage and asked a lot of questions. How do we explain it to a child? We do so by teaching her the truth of the country and its violent past and present. My brother is 6 years old, and he actually is the one who explained it to us. My brother is 6 years old, and he actually is the one who explained it to us. Yesterday, when exchanging I love yous and good nights, we told the 6-year-old how handsome and sweet and perfect he is, then sent him to bed. As he turned off the light, he said, "Remember me after I die." We called him back into the room and asked him to repeat himself. "Remember me after I die," he said again. "After the police shoot me, I'm going to die." I almost cried. You should. You failed. And he's only 6, and you've already failed him. I almost cried because we could not even tell him that it wasn't a possibility at 6 years old. For years, my concerns were primarily for my eldest, a 21-year-old male, Babson College student. A year before graduating from an elite independent day school, he came home enraged by an encounter with NYPD officers at the West 4th Street subway station in Manhattan. That afternoon, he was asked to show his ID to prove that he was a high school student and entitled to swipe his student Metro card at the turnstile. My fixation with protecting my son's body and reputation meant that he missed out on far too many formative high school experiences. To my younger children, I say the police aren't here to be your friends. If you see them, come get me. They are not all bad, but they are all taught to fear us and to see you and others like you as threats. They are not all bad, but they are all taught to fear us and to see you and others like you as threats, especially the boys. After that statement, I was expecting to see the proof of that statement. I had my sons watch videos of Emmett Till, lynchings, court cases, the prison system and how it has impacted our communities and Black fatherhood as an institution, as a way to explain with empathy the lack of fatherhood in both my sons' lives. I had my son watch videos of Emmett Till, lynchings, court cases, the prison system. Why would you have your children, why would you have your sons watch these things? It reminds me of something Sadhguru said. Sadhguru said that a few hundred years ago, something could happen 10 miles away, and you'd still sit down with your family to have dinner, uninterrupted. But today, something happens 3,000 miles away, and the blood spills through your screen. Let's shake it. My son is Black. I'd like to see that. I've never seen a Black human. He grew up with a white police officer stepfather. I've never seen a white human. We both explain to him both sides of what goes on. We explain to him the deadly perception that young Black men are armed and dangerous. I fear for him even in a public restroom. He is big and has music-related tattoos, and I fear that he could be a target for a hate crime, not only police brutality. Life is hard in general. It is much harder for Black men and women. It's not, I guess it is maybe harder for Black men and women. I've never seen a Black man or a Black woman. I have no idea who these people are. Similar to African Americans, these theoretical things, these theoretical people have now become clones. And apparently, someone else is doing the thinking for them. From the time my children were 3 years old, I discussed the compliant behaviors required when interacting with the police. Wait. From the time my children were 3 years old, I discussed the compliant behaviors required when interacting with the police. You tell me that this parent loves their children. At 3 years old, they're telling their children about how to interact with law enforcement. My kids were taught to not even walk the dogs without ID in case the police accosted them. We don't even mow our lawns without keeping ID on us. These people are dangerously scared. As my father taught me, the police need the emotional affirmation that you know they have control of our Black lives. Even though we pay taxes, if you don't give that to them, you will not make it home. During my boys' teenage years, I made it a point to let them know that they had to be very careful if they had interactions with the police. I had to explain to them that as they got older, the consequences for bad decisions got more dire, as white society tends to prosecute young Black males as adults more readily than it does white kids. Rampage, The Briley Brothers, A Tale of Terror. Reed Williams, and Bill McElway, Times Dispatch staff writers. Linwood Earl Briley was the oldest brother, the calculating leader of the Briley Brothers gang. This is from Richmond.com. He began his murderous career at age 16 when he shot and killed a 57-year-old neighbor, Orlin Christian, on January 28, 1971. She was hanging laundry in her backyard. James Dyrell Briley, about 2 years younger than his brother, had the face of a man who was born to die in the electric chair, a veteran prosecutor once remarked. He wasn't bright like Linwood, and he was cold, Warren Von Schuck, now special prosecutor for Chesterfield County, said recently. Youngest brother, Anthony Ray Briley, took part in the vicious robbery and murder rampage 30 years ago, but was spared the electric chair because authorities had no evidence that he personally erased anyone. Together, the Briley brothers and their teenage accomplice, Duncan Eric Meekins, erased at least 11 people in Richmond area in 1979. Authorities believe they might have erased or severely injured as many as 20 people. Fear gripped the area when James and Linwood Briley led the escape of 6 killers from Mecklenburg Correctional Center in the largest breakout from death row in U.S. history. The escape took place May 31st, 1984. For 19 days, Richmonders locked their doors and windows. There was a glow in the city as people kept their porch lights on, and also a quiet. Fewer people were out on the streets. The two were captured in Philadelphia on June 19th. Linwood was executed in the electric chair at the state penitentiary in Richmond in October that year. James met the same fate the following April. It was a reign of terror that slipped beneath the radar of law enforcement for months. The crime struck blacks, whites, the poor, and people of better means. James and Linwood Briley erased to eliminate witnesses to the robberies they committed, but they also seemed to take some pleasure in their work. They murdered with such versatility that police initially did not see a pattern. In one case, Linwood crushed teenage Christopher Phillips' skull with a piece of concrete after suspecting the teen had tried to break into his car. In another, he bashed the head of 75-year-old Blanche Page as she lay in bed, splashing the ceiling with blood in the home she shared with Charles W. Garner. Garner's body was discovered with knives, scissors, and carving forks sticking out of it. The Briley gang lit a fire on his back with the yellow pages. One victim was country and western disc jockey John Gallagher, known as Johnny G. He had been playing bass with a band at the Log Cabin Dance Hall on Jefferson Davis Highway and stepped outside between sets when the Briley brothers abducted him on September 14, 1979. They robbed him and took him to Mayo Island in his own car. Linwood Briley shot him, and fishermen found the body 2 days later, partially submerged in the James River. William and Virginia Butcher got away after the gang left them to burn alive in their Henrico County home. The Brileys knocked on the Butcher's door on Lafayette Avenue of Hilliard Road shortly before 9 p.m. on March 12, 1979. Butcher figured it was the paper boy coming to collect payment. A man told him his car had broken down and asked to call AAA. Butcher said he would be glad to call for him. When Butcher cracked open the screen door To accept the card, the stranger produced a gun and barged inside. Virginia Butcher looked up and saw a man walking toward her with a gun at her husband's head, a knife at his throat. One of the men warned her not to make any noise or they would cut off his ear. The Butchers were tied up with rope. The Briley gang ransacked the house and started spraying lighter fluid all over, including on Butcher's legs as he lay on the floor. Soon, flames were everywhere. The Briley stole the couple's car and abandoned it. They took 2 televisions and other items, including Butcher's .32 caliber gun and his police scanner. The brush with death kept the couple from going out at night for a while. Even now, Butcher is leery. He refuses to go shopping alone at night. The 3 brothers lived in Richmond's Highland Park with their father and several pets, including a boa constrictor, a tarantula, and piranhas. The brothers kept a scrapbook of newspaper articles chronicling their exploits. Meekins lived on the same block. Eventually, months of seemingly random mayhem started to meld together. Richmond and Henrico police were interested in a group of young men who seemed particularly aggressive and standoffish and practiced martial arts in a Northside park. October 19, 1979, and James Briley told a Richmond judge he had no plans of getting back into trouble. He had been paroled after serving time for robbing a convenience store. That night, he and Meekins erased 3 people, a man, a pregnant woman, and their 5-year-old son in their home. Inside the house, 2 of Briley's and Meekins' Inside the house, 2 of the Brileys and Meekins violated Judy Diane Barton, who was pregnant. James Briley shot her 4 times in the head. They took a pillow, held it to Harvey W. Wilkinson's head, and Meekins shot him through the pillow. James Briley put another round in his head of the couple's 5-year-old son, Harvey Wayne Barton. 2 days later, authorities discovered the 3 bodies in the sweltering house on Barton Avenue. Inside the multi-state murder spree of Alton Coleman and Deborah Brown in 1984 by Marco Margaritoff. 2021. Over the course of just 53 days, Alton Coleman and Deborah Brown erased 8 people across 6 states in the American Midwest. This is from allthat'sinteresting.com. Alton Coleman and Deborah Brown. Alton Coleman and Deborah Brown. Let's have a talk. Alton Coleman had a way with words, was charming enough to gain the trust of people he barely knew before brutally erasing them. Coleman's 21-year-old girlfriend, Deborah Brown. Alton Coleman and Deborah Brown eluded authorities for 53 days. Born in Waukegan, Illinois, Alton Coleman entered a life of crime early on. Coleman started with petty crimes like property damage and then moved on to more serious offenses. Before he went on his murder spree, Coleman was already facing charges for violating a 14-year-old girl. Instead of risking prison, he hit the road with his girlfriend. Brown had no history of violence. His girlfriend, Deborah Brown, had no history of violence. The couple met their first known victim in Kenosha, Wisconsin on May 29, 1984. After abducting 9-year-old Vanita Wheat, they brutally erased her. Her body was found in an abandoned building in Illinois. Coleman and Brown escaped to Gary, Indiana. On June 18th, they spotted 2 young girls, aged 7 and 9, and abducted them. Both children were violated and beaten, but one of them was able to escape. The other was choked to death. 25-year-old Donna Williams vanished from Gary. Williams' body would later be found in July 1984 in an abandoned building in Detroit, Michigan. Coleman and Brown were in Detroit. They began regularly stealing cars. On June 7th, the body of an Ohio woman named Virginia Temple was found in her home. Her 10-year-old daughter's body was nearby. While still in Ohio, Alton Coleman and Deborah Brown also erased a 15-year-old girl. On July 13th, they killed another woman for her car and fled to Kentucky, where they kidnapped 2 men but didn't erase them. On July 18th, the couple erased their last known victim, a 77-year-old man in Indiana, to get his car. On July 20th, 1984, he and Brown were arrested in Evanston, Illinois. Coleman was eventually executed in Ohio in 2002. Brown's sentence was commuted to life imprisonment in Ohio in 1991. True Crime Report. The elimination of Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. 2021. Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom were a young couple from Knoxville, Tennessee, who were kidnapped, then viciously tortured, violated, and erased in January of 2007. The case did not receive very much media coverage early on. Shannon Gail Christian was born on April 29, 1985 in Nacogdoches, Texas. After living in Louisiana for a while, Shannon and her family moved to Tennessee in 1997. Hugh Christopher Newsom was born on September 21st, 1983 in Knoxville, Tennessee. Shannon and Chris had been newly dating at the time of their erasure, at the time of their being eliminated. On January 6, 2007, the couple planned to go out for dinner and then attend a friend's party together after. At about 8 p.m., Chris arrived and he and Shannon headed to the parking lot to go to Shannon's car. As Shannon and Chris were hugging each other next to Shannon's car, a group of 5 people, Latalvis Colbins, Lamarcus Davidson, who were half brothers, George Thomas, Eric Boyd, and Vanessa Coleman, ambushed the couple at gunpoint. They were both forced into the back seat of the car and were tied up by the assailants. They were then taken to the home of Lamarcus Davis. When they got to Davidson's house, Shannon and Chris were violated and tortured. A medical examiner determined that Chris had been sodomized with an object and violated by at least one of the assailants. After this, he was forced by the 4 male assailants to walk barefoot to a set of train tracks that were nearby. Chris's hands and feet were then tied together, and he was blindfolded and gagged with a sock. He was then shot in the neck and back, but was still alive after this. After a while, the 23-year-old was then fatally shot with the muzzle of the gun pressed above his right ear, which severed his brainstem. After he was dead, the assailant set his body on fire and returned to Lamarcus's house. Let's go back up and look at these guys. Can any of you see any signs just by looking at them, whether or not their parents had the talk with them when they were children? As Chris was being eliminated, Shannon was held captive by the other assailant. When the men returned, they then began to beat, torture, and violate Shannon for over 24 hours. The medical examiner said that the attack of Shannon was extreme as she had been violated. She had been violated in all holes, and her injuries were consistent with being violated using an object. She was also repeatedly kicked in the head and private parts, which caused her to suffer major hemorrhaging in both areas. She also had many bruises and carpet burns all over her body. According to one of the killer's confessions, Shannon pleaded with her killers, saying she didn't want to die. Before killing Shannon, to remove their DNA, these monsters poured bleach down her throat and scrubbed her body with bleach, including her damaged private area. Shannon was then hogtied with curtains and bed sheets, and then a trash bag was tightly tied around her face, and she was put into several large trash bags. Shannon was then placed inside a waste disposal bin, where the 21-year-old suffocated to death sometime between January 7th and 8th. During this time, Lamarcus went to see his girlfriend, whom he also gave some of Shannon's belongings to, and he was seen wearing Chris's shoes. During an investigation, journal entry from January 9th, 2007 was found, which read, "Last night was one of a kind." During an investigation, journal entry from January 9th, 2007 was found, which read, "Last night was one of a kind. We stayed with the crackhead that is cool as hell. It snowed a little bit, but it's already melted. Let's talk about adventures. I had one hell of an adventure since I've been in the Big TN. It's a crazy world these days, but I love the fun adventures and lessons that I've learned. It's going to be a long, interesting year." Forensic science matched the handwriting back to Vanessa Coleman. Report: mother, daughter dismember and attempt to burn, grill grandmother's body. By Andrew McMunn. June 7th, 2023. Landover, Maryland. Gray News. A woman and daughter in Maryland have been charged in the death and dismemberment of the woman's mother and daughter's grandmother. The Prince George's County Police Department responded to a Landover home in the afternoon for a welfare check after someone called 911 saying they had not heard from 71-year-old Margaret Craig for several days. Officers said they were greeted at the door by Candace Craig, who allowed the officers to search the home for Margaret Craig. When officers entered the basement, they said they immediately smelled the odor of a decomposing body. 3 separate bags of remains were found by the officers. This is from www.wlbt.com. An official with the Prince George's County State's Attorney's Office said a chainsaw was used in the dismemberment, followed by burning parts of the body on a grill and in a bonfire to dispose of it, according to WTOP. Candace Craig erased her mother on May 23rd, helped by her daughter the next day in an attempt to dispose of Margaret Craig's remains. You tell me, when you had a talk, who that talk gonna be about? Who you gonna tell your children to fear? What? You gonna hand them a mirror? Who you gonna tell your children to fear? Do the right thing.